Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're immediately picking up in the aftermath of the previous episode, and Deathstorm kind of goes on to this diatribe of basically, it came to this place because it's trying to get rid of the abnormality that is life. And the way it was almost talking like that, I was like, it sounded almost very similar to the thing from Black Lightning that was pretending to be Jennifer in the final season. Like, it almost feels like, because that thing is like some being from out there, but it seems like it's a different thing, but it almost seems like it's on that same level. I think it's on the general same cosmic level, but still. They are different entities, but I thought that was kind of, it seemed like there might be setting up almost a parallel there. But when this thing went after Caitlyn initially, you're like, wow, no one's around to stop it, but it couldn't go through. I mean, luckily Barry showed up, but even then it's like, oh, it's not enough, but it's coming after Caitlyn again. And part of me was wondering, my initial thought was, well, maybe it can't kill Caitlyn because it says that there's no part of Ronnie left, but maybe there's enough of Ronnie left so that it can't kill Caitlyn because it still loves and cares about her. So, but the entire episode is trying to figure out, like, well, how do you find this thing and how do we stop it? And Caitlyn's beating herself up because it's like, right, Barry warned, like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, but Barry, like, was like, right, and followed through what she wanted, and now it's like, right, people are dying now because of me. I couldn't let go of Ronnie. I lost Ronnie 7 years ago, and I couldn't let go. And now people are going to have to pay the price of me not being able to let go. Which Frost started to make her feel better. It's like, right, this thing is good at manipulating people. We've seen it before. It did it again by pretending to be Ronnie to get you to help it. Because before it was in the black, it went from just the pure black flames to the bluish flames. It is now, but I still think it is considered still the black flame. I think it manifests itself like those blue flames, but I think it is still like when he's burning people, it still represents itself as kind of those black flames. But now he's on a much faster killing spree than before, because I think what we end up ultimately finding out is Barry ends up discovering what this thing actually is. It is basically kind of Ronnie. It's all of Ronnie's grief when he died, and when he was inside that singularity, this entity basically fused with his grief and became Deathstorm, and now it's driven by that grief. So that also, like, the moment that kind of started being presented, it's like, okay, so that's why it's going after Caitlyn, because it's drawn to Caitlyn. Because it's like, right, couldn't you pick any other human being? Why Caitlyn specifically? Because it's reacting, because at its core, it's based on all of Ronnie's guilt and just regret about and grief of not being able to be there for the woman he loves. Which, if the circumstances were different, there'd almost be a beauty to it, because it's almost this star-crossed or cosmic-crossed lovers type of thing of like, oh yeah, I've been searching forever to find my other half. I mean, because the moment we found out about Deathstorm's plan, I was like, oh, I definitely get like Frankenstein's monster and the Bride of Frankenstein type of element going on here. So I was like, oh, that's fascinating. I guess that kind of makes them the Frankenstein, that making the Deathstorm kind of Frankenstein's monster and such. Like, just, I think that's kind of interesting. Like I said, it would be sweet if the circumstances were any other situation. Now it's just kind of like, oh, I guess you could almost go Beauty and the Beast parallels as well. But regardless, like I brought up before, this thing is killing at a much faster rate than because this thing gets from a different, it is basically traveling from basically the space in between dimensions. So, traveling as far as it has, that's for one, why it took 7 years for it to pop up now. Two, it also explains why before the thing couldn't kill as often as it wanted to. It was limited in how much killing it could do all at once because it had to travel all that way and it didn't have a full body, so it couldn't fully punch through. It could only partially punch through the barrier between, like, to leak into this dimension, and now it's like able to go in and out whenever it wants to now. So, and I love that it's like, right, how do we fight this thing? I don't know. How do we prepare people, arm people for it? It's like, how do you tell people, like, you would literally have to give everyone in town therapy to find a way so they could deal with their grief. But it almost seems like you can't even do that. This thing, like, insta-kills people. Like, the way it just, like, claps its hands and sends out a death wave that immediately kills everyone. You're like, how do you fight that? Because at least with the Black Flames, it seems like if you, just like Chester's situation, like, you could muster up what you need to fight back against it, but it seems like there's no doing that. Either because those people who died's grief is so fresh that it instantly kills them. I don't know. It seems like, I don't know. Because it doesn't seem like it does that with anyone else, so it probably hasn't gathered enough power necessary to wipe out people who have a better grip on their grief, like Barry and the others. Like, they faced their grief before, so it's not going to be as easy to take them down, but these other people are still dealing with their grief, and even if they are dealing with it, it's still somewhere in them. I mean, there were people who had gotten help previously and still got killed by the Black Flame, so that's why I'm like, once again, it's an instant kill. Like, he killed, late near the end of the episode, killed 4 people with a single wave. So I'm like, how do you fight that? So even Kristen's like panicking a little because the Flash and Team Flash doesn't even know what to really do about this thing. And it's like, right, she knew she was taking on a lot, becoming captain and stuff. Did not think something like this would happen. So, but Joe's there to kind of play the role of her advisor. He's like, right, I've had to deal with a lot more crazy stuff than I ever thought was possible, but luckily I knew I had Team Flash by my side, that they will find a way. You just have to believe too. And so she's instructing all the cops. It's like, right, we're making sure no one stays out on the streets. You guys be warned, this thing feeds on grief. So if you have recently been through some like sad times or some grief, come to me and Joe. We will help you. But other than that, do not confront this thing. We will leave it to Team Flash to do the heavy lifting. But they couldn't really do too much against this thing because how do we even begin tracking it? But they use Cecile. They kind of amplify. They use her powers because she can sense emotion. And what is this thing? A walking amalgamation of grief. It's oozing grief from all the people it's killing anyway, so they should be able to track it down. Sadly, when they do it, though, it opens Cecile up for this thing to take control, and it's like, oh, like, and I love that thing of like, oh, no matter how much you might deal, like, however long it's been since a loved one's death, there's always going to be a little crumb of grief I can feed on. So don't think any of you are safe, especially because of Barry. It's like, yeah, Barry's dealt with a lot of grief, but he might have dealt with a lot of it, but all the grief he's suffered over the course of his life, even if he's dealt with it, like, say, 95%, let's make it a 99% for, like, each individual situation of grief. That's still small percentages that could eventually add up type of situation. So, because he's lost a lot of people and a lot of things over the course of this series, so. And the way it was kind of focusing on Chester, too, is like, yeah, he confronted stuff about his dad and dealt with that, came to terms with that, but there's still enough of grief there that this thing could still get to him, too, so. Like, it's like, at the time, they still didn't know how to really fight this thing when it can just pop up out of nowhere. Allegra ends up going up against some version of Esperanza, but she wasn't taken back by it. It's like, oh, I know you're messing with me. You're that thing's bitch. And it's like, oh, isn't that kind of sad? And it's like, oh, I think she's like, be careful, Prima, like, I think she said, like, some of that juvie is coming out of you. I think that's what she was saying, or just kind of like, right, that, not even juvie, probably like, like, who you were in jail is starting to kind of creep out of you, that, like, darker side you have. And the two of them attacked each other. And Allegra points out, it's like, right, it wasn't just some illusion. It was real. I felt the impact. We blasted each other. Her blast ended up, like, hitting a panel. So, like, it's that this thing is able to get in your head and make it so real. But for Allegra, it's like, right, it's supposed to be going after Caitlin, so why is it messing with me? Well, it's feeding on grief. And I think Team Flash might have some of the most yummy grief. So he's trying to probably agitate that grief inside of them and make it, tenderize it a little bit, make it more supple and succulent, and makes it easier to gobble it down. Because it might also be part of the plan, because Team Flash might be last. Building up all this other grief, stealing it from all these other, killing all these people and staking their grief and putting it inside Caitlin, trying to make her his bride, probably needs one more push. and that's probably killing Team Flash. Their grief and the grief she has from losing everyone she cares about and loves, her family like that, it's probably going to fully break her and make it so that he can easily make her his bride. I'm assuming that's the direction that might be going, so we'll have to wait and see on that front, but we also got some other pretty interesting things where our boy Barry is riding the lightning. I'm like, hey, second superhero we've seen DC-wise riding lightning. Obviously, in 1984, Wonder Woman literally lassoing and swinging off of lightning. And now Barry is running at full speed, and because of the... I'm not going to get into like the science fiction of how it works. Somehow his boots and how they operate makes it possible. Your boy is just like throwing out lightning and making like little lightning pads that he's kind of like keeping up his speed and jumping off. I'm like, yeah. And he almost caught up with Deathstorm, but that was kind of quite the tumble. He hit the building and kind of tumbled down, but luckily got back on his feet and just jettisoned down the building. So that was pretty sick. I wonder, is that something we're going to see him do a lot more over the course of this season, or is this going to be something that might pop up every once in a while? We'll have to wait and see, but I thought that was pretty dope. I love Chester be like, wait, you're not going to do what I think you're going to do. He's like, yeah, I'm going to ride the lightning. I'm like, yeah! It's always that speedster stuff that Barry does sometimes. You're like, yeah, that's sick, because some of his speedster tricks he doesn't always pull out of his bag all the time. It's just kind of like let's utilize this now that he, once again, got to utilize the fact is that they're not just regular gold boots. They're very specialized boots that, let's lean into them having special properties that really accentuate his abilities and can allow him to do something he can never do, things that he can never do before with his speed. So I think that's quite fascinating. So, but now there's all these changes that are happening inside of Caitlin. And at first when she was feeling pain in her side, I was like, do you don't think he like impregnated her with like a grief baby or something, right? That's what my mind was initially, but it's like, no, like all the grief he absorbed from those 4 people he killed, he ended up implanting that in her. Just, once again, it's the beginning stages, because now she's like, right, my cells and stuff are being like transformed by this, so she's going through a slow process, which is almost befitting because, once again, I could be mistaken, but Deathstorm was the Earth 2 version of Firestorm, and Frost was Killer Frost on that Earth, and they made quite the pair, so it's almost interesting. I don't think it's going to end up being Caitlin, though. I think it's going to start off being Caitlin, but I think in the end, it's going to be Frost that ends up becoming his bride. She might go like Killer Frost, but like, I don't know. Whereas he's Deathstorm, like, she might kind of become the Killer Frost. Or maybe Caitlin will just become, like... I'm curious, will she have, like... Because their powers are, like, what, cold fusion related or something of that nature. So I was wondering maybe... Because they're going to be used as parallels against each other. Makes sense. It is a very befitting relationship of the polar opposites they are. Yeah, I never really thought about the yin and the yang of that whole dynamic of, right, he's fire, she's ice. I don't know, it just never really clicked in my head until just now. So... but I mean, they do say opposites attract, right? So I'm curious to see how that plays out. Or does he plan on making a family and stuff like that? With Caitlyn, or is it just like, now I want my bride? And once you get your bride, what are you going to do? Are you going to leave Earth, or are you going to be like, let's make this our home? We're going to surround this world in nothing but death, and we'll consume all that grief, and this will be, and then maybe it's like, right, and once we're done with this world, we'll move on to the next world, because we have we can go to a different dimension. There's so many worlds filled with life that we can extinguish. So they ended up figuring out that if they want to counter, now that they have a better understanding of where this thing is from, they know that it would take, they want to deal with it the same way they dealt with the singularity that had taken control of Chester, how they dealt with that using that machine. Now, and I love Chester being like, right, that was a couple years ago. He's like, once again, I am so sorry about that. And I think it's so adorable that you see Allegra kind of smiling and laughing, because it's like, right, she that was pre her joining Team Flash, right? I believe. I could be mistaken, but it was probably like, I don't know if that's like the first time ever hearing that story, but it's once again, like, their whole dynamic is super cute. But they would need someone to be inside. Like, to counter this thing, they're basically going to need, like, something to, like, envelop with this cosmic energy. And Frost volunteers because she's like, right, this is what I was made for. My dad literally made me to protect Katie, and I'm literally doing what I was made for. So she's going to basically become like a cosmic Frost. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see how that plays out. If that doesn't end up kind of blowing up in their faces. Either one, he completes the whole Caitlyn thing and she becomes his bride. Or two, he shifts over to Frost instead. And Frost is like, right, I'll be your bride, just leave Caitlyn alone. And now that becomes an issue. We'll see how that plays out. But they have their countermeasures now. I did like that, once again, Papa Joe always stepping in to give the advice. It's like, right, I remember someone who was very inexperienced and had the whole world thrust at him all at once. But, there's a lot he didn't see coming. DeVoe, Zoom, Cicada, Bloodwork. And you know what happened? You're still standing. There's so many threats you never saw coming that seemed like they were so out of your league, but you managed to... Where are all of they? They're gone. The fact is, you have managed time after time after time after time, you've managed to stay on top. Like, just trusting yourself, believing yourself, and just kind of do what you always do, Barry, and run. And you will run to a solution. You'll find it. Just believe in yourself that you can handle this. That you've faced every threat that's ever come your way, even if it seemed like the odds were insurmountable. You and Team Flash have crossed that, faced off and won against the impossible time and time again. So I thought that was pretty dope. So that's where we're currently at with all of that. Then kind of on the other side of this episode is the whole Iris situation. Luckily, Iris came back and you're like, okay, so like, how did Iris come back? Well, it turns out when she disappeared into the Still Force. So whatever Tenya was trying to do to her, make her, like... Because Tenya can, like, phase in and out of things. So my thought was that she was going to kind of, like, phase Iris out of existence. Like, make Iris, like, phase into, like, another plane of existence so that she could interact with this plane. But before she could do anything, subconsciously, not on purpose, Iris went to the Still Force, but the Still Force is supposed to be all time. So past, present, and future. She could see her past and her present, but she couldn't see her future, which makes her think, maybe I don't have a future. It's like, if that's the case, what does that mean about Bart and Nora? So the question is, like, I wonder, are they going to pop up later this season or not? They were trying to get in contact with Dion, but even when they tried to get in contact with him, it was hard for him to track them down. Because it turns out Iris's time sickness, whatever it is, it seems like Dion's got it as well. To the point, like, because he can't, even being part of the Still Force himself, he can't see Iris's future. It made it harder for her to track down. He's like, I can literally see everyone else's future except hers. And now it seems like things have kind of gotten wonky with him. So whatever this time sickness is, it went from her to spread to him. Makes you wonder, was that ever always the point? Like, could this also ever spread to the others? Or is it specifically the Still Force because what the Still Force represents in the grand scheme of, like, the space-time continuum in comparison to the other forces? His is, like, very time-based, so it could be the time sickness isn't just fracturing time for them, it's literally fracturing time, especially because, him being a literal force of nature. So, I was wondering if it would spread to the others, and it probably... Maybe it could, but even if it could, it probably wouldn't. Maybe it wouldn't have the drastic effects it does on Dion, because Dion's the one that's all about time. So, because we still have no idea where the time sickness came from and everything. So, but Dion ends up feeling weird when he's trying to help Iris, and then he ends up disappearing. So you're like, what the hell just happened? I don't think he's dead, but like, where did he go? Did he go back to meet up with his siblings to try and get them to help him? Or is he kind of lost in the space-time continuum? What? they have no idea. And then Iris starts slipping in and out too and disappearing, but luckily Sue was able to ground her. It's like, focus and anchor yourself to the present day. Like, the fact is you can't let go because Barry needs you, your children need you. You say you don't see a future for yourself, then make one for yourself. Focus on making one for yourself. See a future for yourself with Barry and your children. And luckily that was enough to keep her here, so. But it's still only a temporary situation. She doesn't have Dion around to be a Band-Aid anymore. And also, worse comes to worse, like, things could get worse because Tenya could end up popping up. But we get our little stinger at the end where we have Iris running into Eddie. Now, once again, I've said it I've brought it up multiple times this season, and I've talked about it before. I've been waiting and waiting to find out what this Eddie thing is going to end up being. Now, is it the thing of, one, this is actually Eddie and he's related to this time sickness that maybe, much like Deathstorm, something happened to him when he tried to kill himself to kill Eobard, and now something's possessed him and all of that, wanting to get back to his life and everything has infected him, turned him evil, and now he's trying to, maybe almost following in his descendants' footsteps, descendants being Eobard, that he's kind of going super evil and it's going to have catastrophic effects and he's going to become like the big bad next or something like that? Or is it kind of like the whole Allegra situation, which this is where I was like, that still could be there, but my main thought immediately was, I think he's like Allegra. I think that's Deathstorm reaching out to Iris. I think he's presented himself as Eddie because, once again, it's been years, but that small bits of grief that she still feel about Eddie are still there in somewhere. So, just like the whole Allegra thing. So, that's what I'm thinking. Or, once again, maybe it has something to do with the time. I don't know. I wonder if those two situations ever going to cross paths. If the Eddie thing isn't the two storylines crossing paths, I wonder will the whole Deathstorm and time sickness thing ever overlap. We'll have to wait and see, but I'm really interested to find out where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.